So you're teaching them how to fish with their own personal well-being. And at the end of the day, that doesn't just benefit you, it doesn't just benefit the hospital, but it benefits the individuals, and it creates good habits for them wherever they go or however they're involved in their lives. Outside of work, I take my dogs and go on a walk or go on a hike. Sometimes I do yoga on my back porch when my neighbors are not looking at me. It's a little bit about just taking time for myself. I ended up, the very next pet that came in was a golden retriever puppy that was 12 weeks old. I will tell you, I snatched that puppy out of the other technician's hands and snuggled that thing so hard. But because nothing can turn around some of those stressful moments like remembering why you're here in the first place. Because even though there are difficult cases and there are stressful cases, there are equally positive cases with wonderful clients, and it's okay to lean into those things in order to alleviate some of the frustration from the more difficult pieces.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Get MotiVEted's exploratory podcast, where we are exploring all things well-being. On this episode, I will be interviewing Laura Lanning, and she is a practice manager of a clinic here in North Carolina, our home state, and she is a well-being warrior through and through. I cannot wait for you guys to hear this podcast. She is going to share with you not just her own approach to well-being for her life, for her career, but also what it looks like in the hospital setting when you bring well-being to the forefront of the practice. She's also going to share with you guys some tips and a game for managing COVID and the social distancing that's needed when it comes to keeping the practice, the patients, your team safe. So let's get into it, you guys.
So that's where we had left off. Was a good place. Even with Instacart, that's a good place to start with as far as getting into the podcast and talking about your approach to well-being and how that impacts the clinic and your home life and things like that. So if you want to just talk about a little bit, whether it be your journey or just where you're at right now when it comes to well-being, get into it.
So, well-being is a journey, and it's some days I'm better at it than other days. There are certainly days where I feel like I'm practicing things and it's going well, and there are days where I feel like I'm having setbacks. Mm-hmm. Today about lunchtime, I felt like I was having a setback, but I recentered, I got myself back together, and a little bit it's remembering that you're human. So you don't have to have a perfect response to everything. If you mess up, it's okay to say, this wasn't my best moment, and figure out what the next best moment could be for you. What can you do to change it? And how can you take some of that negative energy and turn it into something more productive or something more positive? So it's an opportunity to do better in the future, not so much a failing of, oh man, I didn't practice the most mindful behavior that I have. And sometimes, I do a lot of meditative things, but sometimes when I'm in the middle of the work day and I'm really busy, I can't take the 3 minutes right now. I could 20 minutes down the road, 30 minutes down the road, but I have to do something to get me through to that point where I can take the break and really reset myself. So that's when I find silly things, trying to regain some of that control. One of the things I do is go through my emails and delete emails, because there's nothing that makes you feel more in control than going through and just deleting a bunch of emails. It creates this sense of order and it puts you back together. It takes 60 seconds. So even if things are busy, you can go through and delete 3 emails, feel like, oh, I'm the boss. I was in charge of this, got it taken care of. And you can reset and move on until you have time to do something that's a little more comprehensive.
Mm-hmm. You're so right. I think that's a big misconception, and even a question that I had asked, myself along the way is, people think that you're just supposed to, be Gandhi all of the time or be happy all of the time. But really what we're building is resilience skills. What we're trying to do is to understand what it is that we're getting to and how to get back there. How do we get back to being happy or optimistic or centered or calm, because we are having this human experience and we get so hard on ourselves.
Yeah. And
so practicing a lot of self-compassion and understanding, that came a lot later for me. And even with anger, that's something that it's okay to still experience it. And I experience it in a different way. Sometimes I lean into that feeling and really just sit with that discomfort before I try to move out of it. Because I think people, if they're not familiar enough with the well-being tools that like you and I are talking about, people tend to think that you're just avoiding negative feelings and you're not processing them, right? But that's not quite what's happening. You're just experiencing them in a really different sense. And like you said, you're seeing that as an opportunity to change the lens, moving forward. So you still have those feelings, but you can change the way you experience them, how long you experience them for. That one was a big one for me, like not holding on to it for 3 days. You might still experience it for a couple hours or something, but wow, like a couple hours compared to days or weeks, that's a big deal.
Right. And I had a vet tell me one time, he gave me bad news and I was just looking at him for a second. My face was kind of blank and he was like, you don't look mad. You don't look upset. I was like, I'm just processing. I just need a minute to figure out what this information is and what I'm going to do with it, and decide what my next step is going to be. Because yes, I could fall apart. I could be frustrated. I said, or I could try to figure out what I can do, what's still within my power. What am I still capable of? But sometimes it's that kind of wheels turning. What's the next step going to be?
That's beautiful. Dr. Hawley says that, if something goes, awry, what's the next best thing? And the moment that you have to where you get to choose, I've had those moments. They don't always happen, right? Sometimes we still react quicker, but I've had those moments where you're presented with something and it's almost surreal. It's like you see yourself, as the witness, and you get to make this choice of how do I want to handle this? And if you can ask yourself, we'll have Dr. Hawley edit that out. You see yourself as the witness and you're presented with the information, and then you get to ask yourself, how would my best self handle this?
Right.
And then you move forward with it. And that is a question in my 20s, that was not something anyone had ever said. And that question alone is a tool, to be able to regain that control that you're talking about. And it's so simple and so effective to just change everything, because everything happens after that. Everything that happens after that is going to be dictated based on your response. And so when you get to choose, you can kind of already see the butterfly effect. Like, how is it going to look based on how I decide to respond?
Right. Well, and sometimes because I manage people, sometimes I get to do that just kind of by accident. Because sometimes I have to think about things. I wear multiple hats. Sometimes I'm a technician. Sometimes I'm the office manager and I'm doing the HR pieces. Sometimes I'm just me, who I am as a person. So I wear different hats. So sometimes when someone says something to me, I think about normal Laura would be mad, but office manager Laura has to play it cool because we can't be too frustrated. And so it allows me to kind of stop and think about it from a different perspective, because I am making sure that my reactions aren't causing other people to have their own cascade. I'm responsible for what happens for them. So if someone comes to me and they tell me, hey, we have this circumstance going on and we don't know what to do, if I act like, oh no, there's a circumstance, then I start to trigger other people's concerns. So taking that step back allows me to kind of decide how I'm going to handle it. And then after I do that, it actually I very rarely have to come back to the frustration that I would have felt because I've already chosen a different path.
Yeah. How does stress show up usually for you, like when you have those moments, or when, you know, today's like today, like what does it look like for you in your life?
On an outside perspective, I think my face goes blank because people always say like, everything okay? But I usually need to take a couple of minutes when I'm stressed, whether that's, you know, go sit in my office for a few minutes, go step outside for a few minutes, but I need to take a few minutes to relieve that stress because that stress is an elevation in heart rate. It's an increase in that, you know, you drop things, you can't get it together. And so it's something that could escalate quickly because if you've ever drawn up a vaccine and then dropped a syringe onto the floor and then tried to pick it up and then dropped it again, you know, it escalates from there. So sometimes you have to just cut it off and take a break for a few minutes until you can kind of, all right, this is going to be okay. This is where we're at. But, and I've said it before, but what's the next step? What can I do to replace this feeling of stress and frustration? And that's part of the fortunate factor of working in a team is that the people around me, when they see you're stressed, because part of what we do is positively impact one another, because we take the time to say, hey, you need a break, or hey, can I cover you because I know you're stressed out, because we've kind of created a little bit of that culture for each other. When someone can see that you're stressed out, no one in my office really lets that go. If you're stressed out, we kind of pinpoint in on, okay, what can I do to help you? Can I help? You've dropped that 3 times. You want to hand it to me? I'll take care of it. You know, we kind of call each other out, but in a way, that's what allows you to recognize that you're in that state. And allows you to kind of, you can pass things off to other people because other people know that at some point you're going to take something from them the same way.
Yeah. And, you know, you make a really good point with the recognition part because, you know, people, if you go into a place and you have someone that comes in, they're in a frenzy or they're frazzled and it's 7 a.m. or 8 a.m., if they don't recognize it, their entire day is going to look like that. And that's a little bit of where, you know, like the law of attraction comes in. You know, somehow we would have these conversations where, you know, we would look at the schedule and, you know, you've had those days too where it's like, it looks okay on paper, but it did not feel that way and vice versa. And some of that I think comes from that recognition right there. Am I in some sort of tailspin of negativity or frenzy or frantic or whatever, this like fumbly mumbly whatever, you know, and then you just, oh, it was raining and then I stepped in poop and then I dropped my keys and just all of these things. And whether it's that those things start to occur more or that you're just more focused on them, they would have occurred otherwise, but you're not nearly as focused on them. Instead, you're focused on like, oh, you know, I was playing with a Shih Tzu. He happened to poop on me. But, you know, you're happier that you were playing with a Shih Tzu puppy, you know, and then just talking about the really good things. And I was late for work, but I got to listen to an extra hour of my audiobook or something like that. That's a really late, if you were really like an hour late, but maybe you're stuck in traffic. Yeah, I remember driving home one day. It was years ago when we had that snowstorm. And it took hours to get home, but I was just, I remember listening to an audiobook. I'm like, okay, we're just going to be here. That's all right. Like getting home, but
it's about the spin that you put things, like the perspective that you put things in and the spin you're willing to put on things. Because if everyone was focused on just the negative factors that happened in their day, if that's all you could see of your day, you'd never be happy. You know, you have to let some of those things be less important and let them drop off. You know, I tell the girls all the time, if this happened to you with a cute puppy, or if this was the sweetest cat you know, would you be this upset about it? And the answer is always no, because we all have favorite clients and favorite pets and things that we're biased towards. You know, so sometimes we have to reframe it and say, you know, okay, so this particular cat was a frustrated cat that came with a frustrated owner, and therefore you built into that. said, but if this was your favorite cat with your favorite client and all of these things happened, would you be willing to forgive that and move forward? If the answer is yes, then you owe it to this client and this cat too. So you need to give that and let's move on.
Brilliant. I love it. Do you think that the team has adopted some of those things, you know, those perspectives to do on their own? Or like, have you seen a shift in the team, let's say over the past year, you know, like working around you, being in your orbit? Do you think that, you know, there's like a markable difference?
I think so. I mean, we're humans, so every day you're going to have an individual or two who's not embracing the positive vibes.
Yeah.
But I think it helps because we're doing that from the top down. And
Right.
we talk about, you know, everybody working together as a team, and we do it, you know. So there's nobody for you to turn to with a negative attitude that doesn't have something positive to say back to you. You know, so when we have individual slips, when they turn around, the people around them are ready to be supportive, are ready to be positive. You know, even with our vet, he jokes sometimes. He's like, well, that's it. I guess I'm going to be out today. He's our only veterinarian. He can't leave. We need him to stay. But he says, all right, that's out. That's it. And we joke. We say, okay, well, who's going to be the doctor today? Like, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You know, so we have a joking personality, and I think that over the last year that's become more positive, and it's helped us to recruit more positive individuals into our team. So because when people come to visit and they come to do working interviews, they see that that's what we thrive on.
Yep.
And so we're able to hire people who have that a little bit more inherently because they're looking for a place to call home too.
Yeah. That's really good because, you know, I noticed that a lot. I think everyone's going to have those days. You know, I say everyone may or may not, but I think everyone does. To have those days where things are just off. And at that point, it's not always about you being the best or you being the best Renee. It's about you being the best Renee on that day. Like you giving it your best that day. You know, if I come into work and I am, you know, on day 4 of a flu or something like that, I've already, you know, I've taken a day off to rest and I'm coming back and I'm just not 100%. Then I'm not going to be at 100%. But I'm still, you know, and so it's not the best. You know, you're not going to be, what do they call it? The GOAT, right? Maybe not the greatest of all time, but you're giving it your best for that day. And so, and now if you have this team who's on the journey, right? It's always a journey. No one's ever just going to be like, oh, yep, I've conquered well-being and I'm good for life. Then there's a bigger net, you know, to where if it is just 1 or 2 people having those days, or like, maybe at home, like I notice myself and Neil, it's rare that we both have an off day on the same day,
right? Which
is kind of good, right? You might think like, oh, it'd be great to have an off day on the same day because then you can have your good days together. But at the same time, then no one has your back, right? And then you get to recognize it's okay for them to have that off day. And that's when I think, hey, he deals with my off days. I can deal with his off days. It's not a pattern. It's not, you know, the world isn't ending. And then we talk about it, you know, even with Brayden, he's 8. It's okay to have those off days, but, you know, you still have to be conscious of how you talk to other people, how you talk to yourself, what you do to kind of reset those things. Because all of that, you know, it flows both ways, right? Like you said earlier, if she's got a lot of stuff going on outside of work, it's awesome that you support that, because again, there's some clinics that don't support other people's outside worlds. You know, when you're in their building, you're on their time. They don't want to hear about your outside life, whether it's personal, professional. Maybe they're working 2 jobs. I know a lot of techs who are working two jobs, you know? And so that plays into it, you know, and it's just part of it. So I think that we're rehumanizing the work industry a little bit because maybe we'll say, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that, the workplaces wasn't like that. You know, it was more rigid and people didn't talk about their outside of work lives at work. at work. Exactly. Yeah. So that's a really big deal. That's a really big deal.
Well, and it drives for us, one of our core values is compassion. And we talk about it's really hard for you to be compassionate for an animal or compassionate for a client if you're not also being compassionate with one another.
Yeah.
So we have to take that time to really evaluate it. It's not easy to compartmentalize compassion. It's hard to say like, oh, well, I feel it for this particular circumstance, but I have no feelings at all for this one. So the idea that a business is a business and it can't be partially emotional is not realistic. So I expect that when my team comes in, that when we have a pet that's sick, that all of them are interested in trying to figure out what we can do to resolve that pain. Yeah. So it applies to our staff too. When one person comes in and their mental health is not where they or where we want it to be for them, that we need to get involved and try to say, okay, what can we do to fix it? We are healthcare meets animal care meets compassion. And in the middle of all that is us taking care of ourselves and us taking care of each other. Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head there. I think that's so important to focus on those things because like Jaylin, she too, practice manager, she's part of the Get MotiVETed team. She's one of those people, just like you, she gets it. And when you focus on well-being, when you focus on that mental health, when you keep those things at the forefront, she has said the metrics, the work things, those will unfold organically.
Yeah.
It will all fall in line. But when you don't have the first things taken care of, it's hard to do the other things. You're really like back spinning on those things.
Right. Well, and with everything that's going on with COVID right now, we actually had 18% business growth this last month.
Really?
And that's because when it was hard and when it was difficult, our staff said, nope, we're going to be doing this. It doesn't matter that we have to run in and out of the building, that sometimes it rains, we've got this. But it was the positive attitude that they had that helped lead to the financial piece. It wasn't the financial piece that made them happy. It certainly came from the positive sentiment that our staff were having and a little bit of self-motivation. They didn't want COVID to be something that affected the patient care that we provide. So they set out to that's the mission. What can we do to make that goal achievable? So they worked in teams so that one person stayed and talked to the client and the other person brought the pet in so that the pet wasn't wet. So it didn't stay in the rain, tried to mitigate some of those factors so that when you have a not soaking wet pet in the building and only one person stood out in the rain under an umbrella, that everybody's happier with that circumstance, the client, us, the pet.
Okay. Yeah. What other things did you guys put in place for COVID?
So we had a couple of cool things. One of the things, we had the safety protocols of having our clients stay in their vehicles. Our staff did a lot of over-the-phone consultations, going out to the car, a lot of extra safety protocols, a lot of steps where we needed to change protective equipment, but everything was done curbside. But on an internal piece, we did carside bingo, which was popular. That was an idea that we borrowed from another vet practice in the area, but it was great. So it's a little bingo board, and on the bingo board, it's all the things that would normally frustrate you, like owner brought cat not in a carrier, or owner roll window down to pass pet to us, or slipped outside trying to walk a pet in, all the things that would normally drive you nuts. But instead, when you come in the building wet because you've fallen on the ground, we take a big marker and we cross off the bingo board. So it became a challenge. When we got bingo, we did Starbucks for the whole team, so that everyone felt like they got a reward rather than the punishment of I fell, the client wasn't nice, I couldn't get the cat out of the 3-inch window they opened. It made it a positive spin on some of the frustrations of going out to the vehicle.
That's awesome. I love that. That's hilarious.
Our team were really excited about it. We got bingo 6 or 7 times in the first 3 weeks. So it was happening often, but it became a comical source of, what, got a new one today, who stepped in poop.
Yeah. And now you guys can use that. Oh my gosh, you guys can use that forever now.
Oh yeah.
Just to up the morale.
It's permanently laminated up next to kind of between our reception area and our tech area so that receptionists can get it when they get one and techs can do it. So the whole team is part of the journey.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And then you could just like for holidays, have a Christmas bingo when someone asks you, the classic questions. Yeah.
I look forward to which cat eats tinsel this year. That'll be one of our markers.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's too funny. I like that. I like that a lot. That's cool. We're going to have to, I can't wait to share that with people. I'm going to make like that a little excerpt. I'm going to cut that out because that's so neat. Yeah.
It was fun. It was a fun experience.
Yeah. What about on your home front? What did you do? Did you guys do anything different, you and your husband, for COVID?
Yes and no. He is military, and so he's actually been home most of the COVID scenario. So we had to readjust some things. He's not used to being home. Usually he's gone. So he's been home a lot. He's relearning how to wash dishes and do some of those things so that he'll be the one waiting on me now, instead of the reverse, at the end of the workday. My husband doesn't cook. So when I come home, I still do the cooking. I still make sure that dinner is prepared because we can't have cheese toast every day. Eventually we need something vegetable related. But we've been working on trying to kind of find that balance. It's hard when you're stuck with someone all the time. It's someone you choose, but at the same time, you can feel really stuck because it's the same thing. You don't have anywhere to go. So normally I would go out and do something and get a few minutes to myself. You don't have that. So we've had to find a little bit of a balance of we can go to separate sides of the house, and that's okay. It's okay if I go sit on the back porch and read for 30 minutes and he plays a video game.
Yep.
We don't have to spend all the time truly together.
Right.
And it's communicating when you're frustrated with something. So rather than being frustrated and holding on to that for 3 days and then having a volcanic explosion, instead we figured out the very first time it bothers you, kindly, politely, let them know, hey, this is a frustration. And if when you said it and you're hangry or you're exhausted and you maybe shouldn't have said it in that tone, apologize.
Yeah.
Say, oh, I'm so sorry. The other day, his car is broken right now. So the other day he came to pick me up from work and he started talking to me. And I said to him in the nicest way that I could, I said, I'm so sorry. I eventually want to hear about your day, but right now I need 10 minutes of quiet. Can we just have 10 minutes of quiet?
Yeah.
And he listened to that. And after the 10 minutes, he said, do you need a snack? Are we good? What can I do to help?
Oh, good. What can I do to help? I like
communicating clearly and politely.
Yep. Communication is really big. And communication, for me, has become easier the more mindfully aware I am because I can communicate it more clearly. It's not just this vague, answer because I don't know what's going on. Right. So when you know exactly what your needs are, you're able to communicate them. Right. So that's really good.
And a lot of the frustration in relationships comes from people not understanding what the other person needs or wants. Right. So that's totally true. If I am really starving and I get really grumpy and frustrated, if I don't know that I'm hungry, I'm just mad for an hour until I figure that out. But the more mindful I am, the more I'm learning to take a few deep breaths and kind of recenter myself and figure out what is it that is causing this for me, the better I'm able to share that information and the more appropriately the other person can respond because then they know what it actually is that you're looking for.
That's a tactic for me. Before, often I get so hangry. So often right before they get home, like whether it be Neil and Brayden, before the guys get home, if I'm hungry, I will eat just, like 100 calories or something, just some snack pack, like nuts, just something in my belly just to get me through because if not, I am much shorter. Yep. And then for whatever reason, your brain just stops, right? You're starving. Starving is over exaggeration, but you're starving. And so you can't think of what to do for dinner. And then that becomes, now it's an hour and a half that you, So, yes, that is a huge tactic for me, is just to not get too overly hungry. And it's funny because we think about that for kids and stuff, but as adults, people really let that go. They're just angry at like 11:30 at their work day, but they aren't, keeping in mind that, oh, lunchtime is right there. Or it's 3:00 in the afternoon. Like, I know what time it is based on how hungry I am. And I know what time it is based on what I'm craving. Usually by about 3:00, I'm wanting something semi-sweet. So like a piece of fruit or something like that. And it usually happens at that 3:00 mark. I mean, almost to the T. It doesn't matter what I ate for lunch. It doesn't matter what time I ate for lunch. At 3:00, my body is saying, I need energy.
I always still feel like it's after school. As a kid, that same after school time, I need a snack. It's time.
Yeah. It's so true. Yeah.
Actually, my husband, when we first started dating, he used to keep a box of granola bars in the console of his car because I was not so great at being mindful about when food was a priority. So he would keep granola bars. That's how I knew he was the one. He packed food for me.
Heck yeah. That is awesome. There are granola bars in my nightstand right now, actually. I have a bunch of Kind bars in there because when I wake up at 4 a.m. with him and I'm starving, I just reach over and then I eat a Kind bar.
It's perfect. You need them and they're handy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is awesome. Yep. That is awesome. I get that. My next question, do you think that your focus in well-being has impacted your professional development as a leader?
Yeah, absolutely. I it has forced me to think more about what I do in my role. So I've always enjoyed leading people, but I didn't get into this field thinking that I was going to be an office manager. I at first thought I was going to be the veterinarian, and then I figured out I actually don't want to be the one that has to make those decisions, but I like leading other people. I like guiding people, and that's something that I've always enjoyed doing and I feel is impactful. But when I first started doing it, I struggled to try to understand what everybody else needed and what I could do to actually give that to them, because very little of what people actually need on a daily basis, they're able to communicate with you that they need. So you have to start reading between the lines and figuring out what the cues are in order to understand what you can do to help them. So I feel like the more that I've learned about myself, the more that I've kind of taken a step back and I don't want to say managed, but that I have got a handle on what I personally need and how I can kind of ease into things. It allows me to figure out how other people might be able to do that too, or to see when there are differences. It helps me to figure out in a very non-personal way for them, if they don't want to talk about it now, when do you want to talk about it? Or what could we do to adjust the circumstance? So I feel like it has helped me to kind of get through to my team a little bit better and help my staff to understand what we need as a whole.
Yeah, that's really good. What kind of advice would you give to an aspiring leader, even if it was, a veterinarian or a vet student or a tech, I think that, in our field, we have so many different types of leaders, right? You have your office managers, you have your shift leads, you have your veterinarians who maybe in some settings are, we'll say, overranked by a shift lead or a manager, right. But the team looks to the veterinarian as the leader. Right. There are plenty of other teams who maybe none of those things exist. There isn't a head tech or a head receptionist or a team lead. There isn't maybe there's not a veterinarian in the hospital at that time. And so they look to one of those team members because maybe they're a natural leader or they have the most seniority, whatever the case is, right? So there's lots of different leaders in our industry. What kind of advice would you give someone that was either an aspiring leader or even a current leader?
Yeah. Research. read a bunch of books, listen to a bunch of podcasts, get on YouTube, learn, search for anything that's currently plaguing your team and look at the perspectives that other people have and find what works best for you. It's okay to disagree with something that somebody else thinks is a good plan, but learn enough about different learning styles, different teaching styles, different training styles so that you can create one for yourself. I personally love servant leadership. So I have read a bunch of books and listened to some podcasts about servant leadership, but I had to sit down one day with another office manager, which I recommend, sitting down with somebody else, whether they're in your area or in a totally different area, and just see how common the personnel problems are, even if you're not in the same field, even outside of veterinary medicine.
Oh yeah.
People. So you can sit down with them. But she told me one day, oh, we don't say don't. In our hospital, we don't say don't. And I was like, what do you mean we don't say don't? How does that work? You have to use the word don't at some point. She was like, no, so if somebody says that they can't or they don't want to do something, we don't do that. Yes, it's only positive terms. And I thought to myself, I can't do that. So like, I can't. And then I thought, wait, I just don'ted myself. I was like, as I was thinking about this, but if she had never said that, I wouldn't have thought about positive terminology and how to use positive words in place of negative words. Yeah. So instead of saying like, I can't do that, saying, would it be okay if I do that later? Or what time frame do you need this done in? You know, how do you turn that into positive phrasing and how do you use positive phrasing with your team? Mm-hmm. But the best way to get that is to kind of plug a lot of information into your brain and see what you think fits for you, fits for your team, fits for the people around you, kind of morph your own style out of that.
That positive terminology too does something subconsciously, right? So you are able to move the ship, if you will, in a less obvious way.
Right.
Because it does make a difference. You know, I'm sure everyone's heard it. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. Well, now we're talking about it is what you say.
Right.
But there's a whole different, it lands very differently when it's said in certain terms. And so actually I was speaking with someone in pediatrics who was telling me that when you talk to children, it's a double negative when you tell them like not to do something. And so it causes them to think harder and longer. And so what you're supposed to do, instead of saying like, don't touch the door handle, you tell them what you want them to do. Hey bud, can you grab the door handle like this? Or shut the door like this. So you actually just redirect them without stopping them in their tracks, making their gears turn. You know, you just give them a new direction. And I thought that was really interesting. Same thing. And here we are, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. Our parents didn't tell us that. Our parents told us no, and they told us don't do that. And so here we all are. All of us are in this workforce telling each other don't, can't, etc. And it's a huge shift. The other thing I think that it plays into is the way that we speak to our clients. Is when you change the verbiage with your clients, you're training them in a completely different way too. Those expectations start to change. They understand what the hospital, you know, how it functions, and you're able to retrain. A lot of people think, well, that's just not going to work. Our clients need these hours or these days. That's not true. That's a fallacy. There's a lot of different ways that you can reshape the relationship that you have with your clients in order to improve your well-being, right? Because that's what we're seeing a lot in the workforce is that, you know, this, whether it's blame or whether it truly is maybe a bottleneck or something that happens at like 3 or 4 o'clock, you're able to reshift. It will take time and it'll take a change in verbiage, but it definitely can be done, you know, to where you don't have that, you know, experience. And I love your answer about research. That's how I've gotten to where I am in life today, because I just started researching for my own self. Yep. So I love that answer. And you're absolutely right, because everyone has to figure it out on their own. And for you to be able to differentiate what type of leadership you work best with, I mean, that is, I don't have a word for it right now. It's amazing.
And it comes from talking to other people too. I went to a conference, and in the conference, people were talking about, oh, well, we put our clients on hold, we get back to them later. And I'm like, we have a hard time with that, because when I put clients on hold, you get back to them, and as quickly as you can, no matter how short the time period is, they're frustrated because you place them on hold. And then we got into, well, what are you telling them? We're saying, is this a medical emergency, or can I place you on a brief hold? We're putting them on hold. We're saying thank you. We're putting them on hold. And then we pick it up. We say thank you for holding. Yeah. Somebody said, why are you telling them thank you for holding? Why are you telling them thank you for doing something that I made you do? You should say thank you for your patience, because you're thanking them for an attribute that they have, not thanking them for doing something you kind of forced upon them.
Right.
So we took that up. Our team now says, thank you for your patience. How can I help you? You'd be surprised how quickly that turns clients back into clients that are happy, because you thanked them for being supportive, appreciative, patient people. And it turns the whole conversation around.
And it shifts you out of a place of guilt.
Yep.
So I read that when it comes to talking with your friends, you sit down with your friend after lunch and you say, I'm sorry, right? You say, I'm sorry. And you apologize. How many women spend 90% of their day apologizing to themselves, to their friends, etc.? But if you sit down and you say, thank you for understanding. Right. Thank you for your patience. You shift out of that guilt role and you come into this empowered sense of confidence. And right. So, picking up that phone and not feeling guilty, and the time in between that phone being set on hold, you doing whatever it is that you have to do, is not spent in angst, with this tightness in your chest, thinking that you are doing something that you shouldn't be doing, or you should be doing something faster. You're shooting all over yourself, and instead it's okay. Yes. And I've had really good luck when I'm transparent with my clients, because I've even had really good luck with calling them back. If I set up an appointment and I only have, 5% of the information that I need, the bare minimum to set my appointment, and then I call them back with either estimate expectations, further, diagnostic information, things like that, they are so surprised, and they're even more over their fence. And they really appreciate it. And then obviously that helps the day go smoother and stuff, but you've got to find that time to do it. And then in the beginning of the conversation, the right words, so that they know, it's okay to, why do you only need this tiny piece of information right now? This seems like I should be giving you more information. And then people begin to trust you with that.
Right. But it's about building a little bit of that rapport, but it helps you and it helps your clients.
Yeah.
But you're totally right. You train your clients the same way that the clients train the staff members.
Yeah.
If you have certain clients who do things consistently, we know what that pattern is, and we jump on board with whatever they're doing. But the same is true in reverse. We train our clients that we're open this time to this time, or you need to come in a little bit sooner. We have to explain what the expectations are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I love having conversations with you, Laura. What do you think that the vet community could benefit from most right now when it comes to well-being?
Stress relief. It is a stressful field. We deal with stress from the client. We deal with stress from the patient. We deal with stress from each other.
Yeah.
We know across the board that we are short on veterinarians. So everyone's looking for an associate or a veterinarian to join their team, and we just don't have enough to fill all the spaces that we have.
Yeah.
Technicians, especially in our area, trying to get a technician who's ready and trained and hired can be really difficult. They have a bit of the pick of wherever they want to go. So you have to make sure that your hospital is competitive for that, which means we're always really, really busy and really short-staffed. So we know that we are pushing ourselves to the limits of what individuals are capable of. Yeah. And then we're still trying to provide the best quality healthcare that we can. We're trying to move the bar on what's considered standard for healthcare to increase it, so that clients understand how important blood work is, how important some of those preventative care features are. Yeah. So we're pushing ourselves to 90 or 100% as often as possible, because we think that that's what's pushing our industry forward.
Right.
And while that might be true, if we do that the wrong way, then you do take technicians who've had years of experience and they get burnout and they're frustrated and they're tired. And the reality is they could make more money working in human dentistry, and they would work less hours and they have an easier lifestyle. Mm-hmm. So we have to make sure that we're fostering the reasons that people get into the field. We have to foster that as we are helping them to mitigate some of the stress of daily life, so that they don't take home with them the case that was really difficult for them throughout the day, so that they don't come home and feel that burden of things that didn't get taken care of, or people that they didn't feel like they satisfied. Yeah. We already ask so much of our teams that being able to help manage some of that stress, leave some of that behind when you go home and have a good work-life balance, I think that's really important.
What sort of things do you do for stress relief?
It depends on the time of day. Okay. If I am in the middle of something, I actually have a stress rock, and it's like a little river stone that I put in my pocket, because I tend to be a very fidgety person when I'm thinking and working through things and stressed out. And so I found I can continue with my tasks if I can just run this between my fingers for a few minutes. It gives my hands something to do. It's the equivalent of like a fidget spinner. And that gives me a little bit of a physical energy release while I work on things with my brain. Then I do sometimes take a few minutes to meditate in my office. I'm fortunate I have a space to do that. I have a team who's really willing and understanding of that. So I will sometimes go in and say, hey guys, I need 3 to 5 minutes. I just need to be by myself for a few minutes and do that. Sometimes I take my 5 minutes with a pet in the building. Our team takes 5 minutes each day to go find a pet in the building, give it some extra love. Sometimes I do that. Sometimes I do that a couple of times throughout the day, depending on how stressful it was. Yeah. Today we had a really stressful case with the C-section, and so I ended up, the very next pet that came in was a golden retriever puppy that was 12 weeks old. I will tell you, I snatched that puppy out of the other technician's hands and snuggled that thing so hard. But because nothing can turn around some of those stressful moments, like remembering why you're here in the first place. Because even though there are difficult cases and there are stressful cases, there are equally positive cases with wonderful clients. And it's okay to lean into those things in order to alleviate some of the frustration from the more difficult pieces. So I do that. And then outside of work, I take my dogs and go on a walk or go on a hike, or sometimes I do yoga on my back porch when my neighbors are not looking at me. It's a little bit about just taking time for myself.
Yeah. That's really good to prioritize your self-care. That takes time.
Yeah.
What do you think about, you've been with the practice for some years and you've been with Get MotiVETed for about a year. What would you have to say for other people who are just learning about Get MotiVETed, or what it's like to work with Get MotiVETed?
Yeah. I will tell you, I love Get MotiVETed. Dr. Hawley walked into our office one day. I thought, I don't know what this person's here to talk to me about, but okay, I'll talk to them for a few minutes. And then I was in the room with him for 30 or 45 minutes. I came out feeling so refreshed and rejuvenated, and it was the best experience to get to talk to someone who understands the difficulties of our field, who also has some good insight to kind of provide that I hadn't thought about, ways that I hadn't thought about things. It kind of forces me to think about things differently. And when we got signed up for GMU, so now we have the Get MotiVETed University, our staff have that. And it's been really nice to be able to offer our team an outlet for them to learn something for themselves. It's not required. It's not mandatory. It's not a lunch and learn that they have to sit through. Sometimes we do lunch and learns, but for GMU, they get to go home, do it at their own pace, in their own way, when they feel ready. And that's the biggest part. Is sometimes we have a young millennial staff. Sometimes they're not ready to talk about it when we want to talk about it. So they need to have a really hard day and just be reminded that this is a resource. I'll have frustrating conversations with my staff. They're burnt out, they're tired, and I will have the conversation with them. And at the very end, I'll slip them the little card we have that's a reminder of how they log into their GMU. And I'll pass that to them. I'll say, don't forget you have this as a resource. and pass it back to them so that they know that they have that available. Yeah, and sometimes it's not always about doing it. Sometimes it's about knowing that it's there for them.
Yeah.
Knowing that we care about them enough to provide that as a resource for them, and knowing that they're not in it on their own. That they have somebody they can talk to, they have a resource they can go to, that their team supports. That if somebody says, hey, I need to take a 20-minute longer lunch, I've got to do this thing for GMU, I'm trying to get myself back centered. Okay, great. Take your time. Get it. Take care of it. So I have really enjoyed having you guys come out and do conversations with our staff, because they like to pick your brain and talk about things. But it's also great to have a resource that they have at home that they can do when they're mentally ready to be engaged and be involved.
Yes, that's well, thank you for that. I think you really pointed out something as far as having, even if you're not doing it in the moment, just knowing that it's there, and then being able to provide that as a resource. Because like you said, when you're in the moments, it's not always an option to be doing something really active in relation to your well-being, but knowing that those resources are there for you so that you can build up the skills when it comes time.
Yeah.
Awesome. What else would you like to share with the community? Is there anything that you'd like to share with the community and the listeners for Get MotiVEted and the veterinary community?
Mostly just a sense of positivity. Yeah. Changes happen a little bit at a time. You don't walk in one day and say, all right, guys, today we're going to focus on ourselves and we're going to be positive, and it all just turns out great on day one. It's a process. Yeah. And there will be days where you feel like nobody is on board with you. There will be days where you feel like I'm sitting in my office meditating and everybody else is frustrated and mad, and nobody is on the same playing field with me. We're all doing different things in different ways at different times. Yeah. But over time, you notice those things start to develop and to build, and you start to see your team saying to one another, hey, do you need a couple minutes? Because I'll take care of this for you. And your heart will start to melt and warm a little bit, because they're doing things for each other that traditionally you've been doing for them. That you've been always the one to jump in. So I got a really great compliment the other day. I was out one day, and one of my staff members sent me a text message that said that another staff member wasn't doing great that day, but they got it taken care of. Let me know if we need anything. So a little reminder that you're creating skills so that your staff and your team can help take care of each other and take care of themselves. Yeah. So you're teaching them how to fish with their own personal well-being. And at the end of the day, that doesn't just benefit you. It doesn't just benefit the hospital, but it benefits the individuals. Yeah. And it creates good habits for them wherever they go or however they're involved in their lives. You're trying to build lifestyle options for them. So it's a bigger picture than just how today went, whether or not today was good or bad.
I love that analogy of the teaching them how to fish with their skills, because it's exactly right. Like you said, you can't do it for them.
Right.
And even if you were to do it for them, it's not serving them as much as actually teaching them.
Right.
Themselves. That's great. Love it. And that reminds me, with Get MotiVEted University, that reminds me as far as the communication between, say, Dr. Hawley and myself and then you, looking at different ways to get the teams more involved. So I don't think that we've had conversations, we've thought to ourselves, how much, we wanted to provide a resource to people that could be sort of not anonymous, but like we're not tracking, but that it's there for them. What do I mean to say? Sometimes employee benefit programs, people don't trust. And we wanted people to trust the program. And that was whether it be online access of the courses or whether that be connecting with us individually for coaching, whatever the case is, like we wanted for them to have some sense of privacy when it came to their own experiences.
Right.
But I think that as a leader, when you are providing those services, maybe having those conversations around maybe not who's in the courses, but maybe it's a percentage or maybe it's a number, just so that you get a better sense of, are there people using the resources that you're providing?
Right.
And then the same thing for us is, are people using the resources that you guys are providing, right? Because that question and that answer goes both ways. And if not, are there ways that we can make those things better? Is it the user experience? Is it the platform? Is it the type of learning? How can we make it better, more digestible information so that people are able to just, to use what we're talking about, right? Because you could have the greatest solution in the world, but if no one knows about it, it's not going to go anywhere.
Right.
So yeah, that we'll probably have to do that. I'll have to bounce it off of Dr. Hawley and we'll have another conversation, the three of us.
Yeah. And it would be nice from an internal perspective to be able to know what percentage roughly of people are utilizing the resource. That way we would be able to say, am I discussing this appropriately? Is there a different way that I could talk about it? How could I make it clear to other people that this is a good opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that we're, as a team, presenting it the way that does it the best justice.
Yeah. Do you know, from what people have told you, like, are people, I'm guessing people are using the podcasts a lot more than the courses and stuff. Do people talk about the podcasts and things like that at work, or?
Not openly. Most people talk about it. Usually when I get into conversation with them, like during a review or when we're one-on-one and in a private setting, they'll talk about it then. But yes, most people like to hear it versus reading it.
Okay.
At least most of the girls on my team, we tend to be visual on some things, but when it comes to reading, it feels like you're reading a manual versus listening to an audio sound. And so most of our team is more auditory for this kind of material and this kind of information. So most of them like to hear it. And even when I'm going through GMU, because I like to kind of listen to it sometimes more than once. And so I'll listen to it through and then I'll listen to it again. Whereas I know myself, I wouldn't read it more than once, but I would listen to it more than once.
And what do you think between audio and video? Like, do you think that the video part is, and by video, I mean two different ways as far as, like this, a person video, or like the presentation videos that we have, do you think that it's still easier just on an audio front, like, to where you're listening into the car or when you're walking or running or whatever?
I personally like the video content better, but I do think my team likes the audio content better.
Yeah.
So I might be an outlier in that. I like the video content because it keeps me more engaged to watch something versus just listening to it. It helps me to absorb more information, but most of the girls prefer to listen to things versus trying to watch it because they listen to it while they do other things.
Yeah.
And part of what they do that I always think is kind of interesting is they talk around the topics without, I'll know because I've talked to two of them that they've both done the same thing, so I know that they're on the same page, but they'll talk around it rather than saying like, hey, I learned this and this is what I think we should do. They'll say, well, what if we were doing this instead of that? And I'm like, I know exactly where this came from. You know where this came from. She actually knows where this came from. But okay, we're going to talk a little bit of a circle around it. As long as we get there, that's fine. But so it is interesting. I do think there's still a little bit of that stigma. No one likes to admit that they need help to develop. Everybody wants to think that they've developed in this vacuum, that nobody helped them, that everything went just the way they wanted it to the first time. Even though we all know that's not true, I do think that there's a little bit of a stigma with, I didn't do it all by myself. I had to get some help to do it.
Mm-hmm. Some of that self-help perspective.
Right. Well, and it starts a little bit at a time. I tell my staff very openly to big groups of them when we're one-on-one, I say, I do it. I think you should do it. I recommend it, because we make so many recommendations to our clients based on having done them ourselves. So I do the same thing. I'm like, it's just like any other recommendation that you'd make. I do it. I support you doing it. Like, you have to encourage it. And then we encourage them to encourage each other that same way. Be open, communicate.
Yep. Awesome. All right, lady. Well, I won't take up too much more of your time this evening, but I'm definitely going to connect with Dr. Hawley, and then yes, we'll get back together and we'll spitball the GMU thing for you guys too.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And just, other ways that we can help the clinic and anything that we can do to level up everyone there.
Yeah, I'd like that.
Awesome. All right, Laura. Well, thank you so much for being on the call today.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks, Laura. Have a good evening.
Thanks. Have a good one.